Hi everyone and welcome. My talk today is about accessibility on Android, or how to make Android apps for everyone. My name is Pamela Hill. I'm an Android engineer and tech lead from South Africa. You can find me where I blog at PamelaAHill.com, or you can tweet at me anytime. My handle is at PamelaAHill. So let's have a look at the topics that I'll be covering today. I'll start with a discussion on what accessibility is and why it's really, really important. And together we'll make a case for making our apps more accessible. I'll explain the different kinds of disabilities that there are, and also the tools that the Android platform provides to assist these folks. Creating an accessible app actually starts in the design phase. So together we'll look at how to make our designs more accessible. I'll explain the Android accessibility services and how you can make sure that your app is optimized so that disabled folks can have a great user experience using your app via these services. And lastly, I'll end off with some great tools that can help you test and verify the accessibility of your app. You might have heard the term accessibility and understood it to mean as enabling folks with permanent disabilities to access technology. However, accessibility has a much broader scope. According to Wikipedia, the source of all truth, right? Accessibility is the design of products, devices, services, and environments that work to include everyone. But everyone also includes those folks with situational or temporal impairments, such as maybe a broken arm or when you're carrying something heavy. Age-related conditions also fall within the scope of accessibility. But how important is accessibility really? Well, according to the World Health Organization, 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. And the estimate is only growing due to population aging and the rapid spread of chronic diseases. So I'd say accessibility is really, really important. But considering the statistic, it's clear that that's really important. But why are we still making apps that don't consider accessibility? What do we really think when we think about accessibility? And I think it's partly ignorance and fear and partly procrastination, maybe. Perhaps we feel we don't know enough about disabilities to make our apps accessible. Perhaps we think that by cramming more and more features into our apps, we can give the majority of our users a great user experience. And maybe that's good enough for now. But perhaps we think that we can make our apps accessible later. So actually, the hardest part of accessibility is the willingness to do it. I might have convinced you that accessibility is a key aspect of app creation. But what about your product owner? Let's try and make a case for making your app accessible. Firstly, it's just the right thing to do. Nobody likes being excluded, and we're excluding disabled folks from using our apps by not making our apps accessible. Accessibility also benefits everyone, not just disabled folks, because accessible design is simplified, clear, and to the point. Accessibility can be a big business opportunity as well. We've seen that a large portion of the world's population are affected by disability, and not a lot of apps are actually designed with these folks in mind. So it's also a key differentiator in a very competitive app marketplace. The Accessibility Project classifies disability in 4 categories: visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive. But some other sources also include neurological, speech, and I would like to include mental illness. Let's have a look now at the tools that the Android platform provides to assist these folks. Firstly, we have TalkBack. TalkBack is a screen reader, which is a tool used by folks with some visual disabilities that give a spoken feedback of what's happening on their device's screen without them having to look at the screen. To navigate, you either swipe left or right to go to the previous or next screen, and TalkBack will then announce these views. To interact with the screen or the user interface, you use gestures like double tapping. Braille Back is a tool used by some folks with visual disabilities, and it works with a refreshable Braille display and TalkBack. So content appears on the Braille display so that these folks can read with their fingertips, and they can also interact with these devices using keys on that device. Switch is a device that is used by folks with some motor control impairments. And Switch Access integrates these devices with your Android device. Switch has two buttons, one for navigating and one for selecting. Android provides so many more tools that will assist folks with impairments and disabilities, but the tools that I've mentioned are the most important for our discussion today. So next, let's have a look at how we can actually go ahead and make our apps more accessible. Accessibility starts with design. A design with a passion for accessibility can lay a solid foundation that will create a great user experience for both abled and disabled folks. Phil Weaver, the Android accessibility team lead at Google, gave 3 rules for creating accessible designs. While this list is not exhaustive, it's a great place to start. Firstly, he said, make information visible, readable. Prefer simple big controls and label images precisely and concisely. So designing actually requires designer to rethink and reconsider aspects such as copy, typography, color, and imagery or photography. In my mind, design is a delicate balance between form and function, between the need to be creative, unique, and on brand, and the need to be understandable and usable by everyone. So let's have a look at all these design aspects in turn. Copy first. So copy should be localized, concise, and descriptive. Localized copy actually assists folks with limited English vocabulary to understand the app in their native languages. Screen readers will laboriously go and read through all the copy that you have associated with your assistive text. So it's really important that it's concise and yet descriptive. Note that many screen readers will also announce the state as well as the type of control using a word or a sound. So it's not needed to actually include that in your assistive text for that control. When deciding on copy for a particular control, prefer verbs over nouns, what the control does over what the control actually literally means. For example, if you have a plus sign on a floating action button, that often means add or new. That is much more preferable over plus or plus sign. The purpose of typography is to provide you with content, so text really needs to be very easily readable. Android provides a lint warning for font sizes that are smaller than 12 SP or scale-independent pixels. And that provides a really good rule of thumb for minimum text size. Please remember that it's possible to change the setting on your device to a font scale that is either small, normal, large, or even huge. And that will vary the scale of the font between 0.8 to 1.3, the standard scale. It's really important, therefore, to go ahead and test with these settings so that you don't have nasty overlaps on your views. Prefer heavy weights over lightweight font in your font families. I know designers are very often fond of using the lightweight fonts, but they just simply aren't readable. Centered text also increases cognitive load by starting each line on a different place. And similarly, justified text will increase cognitive load by having a different amount of space between each word. And this increase in cognitive load makes it difficult for folks with cognitive disabilities to actually go ahead and read some text. So instead, what you can do is a suggestion by digital designer Tatiana Mack. She suggests creating a centered container with left-aligned text. Also, with capitalization, remember that it's often used for call to action buttons, but it also increases the cognitive load. And it's really important to remember that you need to use on Android, the text all caps attribute to specify your all caps text, and not just the text attribute, because if you just type in capital letters, TalkBack is going to announce it as an abbreviation, which must be very, very confusing for users. Color is a really powerful design element, but take care in when selecting the palette for your app. The contrast ratio is our first element that we need to consider when it comes to making color accessible. A contrast ratio is actually how different the one color appears from the other. So you need to make sure that the contrast ratio between your text and the background is sufficient so that it actually stands out. Small text needs to have a contrast ratio of between 4.5 to 1, whereas larger text needs to have a contrast ratio of 3 to 1. The material design color tool that's available on the web is actually a great help in this. It will tell you whether your chosen palette is actually readable with white or black text. When it comes to visual cues, make sure that you don't only rely on color to provide visual cues. Very often folks with color blindness have difficulty perceiving differences between colors and would miss those critical cues. So instead, you can maybe add an icon or some clear error message instead of just having a red box around a form field. Don't rely too heavily on motion either, because there are some devices that allow the motion of a device to be completely removed, and this is because it affects folks with motion sickness. Most designers and developers know that they should provide alternative text for imagery, but often this is neglected or also omitted. Once again, this text should be localized, concise, and descriptive. Provide a content description to the developer as microcopy, ensuring that it's really well thought out and clear, and not just a quick rush job by a developer. When it comes to designing for mental illness, it is uncharted territory. But I've thought about and really heard about some techniques that might be helpful. For example, those folks that are affected with anxiety will really benefit from clear instructions. And if they need more reassurance, to have more information or assistance. Folks with impulse control problems, such as folks with bipolar in a manic state, would benefit from cues to stop, consider, and then act, especially when action is not very easily cancelable or reversible, like online shopping. Let's have a look at how tools like Switch can actually be used to integrate with our app. So our user needs to be able to view the app and also interact with the app. But does that mean that we actually have to integrate with every accessibility service out there? No. The Android framework actually provides most of the necessary integrations for us. Mostly, all that our app needs to do is a few things here and there, and that's just to accurately represent the information to the user. It's pretty nice. So the one thing most people know about accessibility is that they need to provide assistive text for images, also known on Android as a content description. This little code snippet will go ahead and provide to TalkBack the text twinkly star for an image that is of a star, obviously using the content description attribute. But actually, it's not really always necessary to label every image. Some images are purely decorative. In that case, we can set the content description to @null, and that will get rid of that pesky, like Android Studio warning. Even more explicitly, we can use important for accessibility, and we can set that to no. I like this better because it's more explicit about our intentions. So next I created an app called Spark Cats. It's basically like a favorites app for cats. And the first screen that I want to show you is an individual cat's profile screen. Notice we have two text fields at the top, one for the label name, and the next one for the cat's name, Eliza. So if we normally go ahead and implement this, of course, I would externalize the string. Remember, this is a demo app. We would have two text views, one for the name label and one for the cat's name. But the problem is it's not very accessible. A TalkBack user would actually hear the name and then would have to swipe right to hear Eliza. So how do we fix it so that these two are actually read together? Well, the one option is to group these two text views into a new parent layout, this constraint layout, and then setting two properties on it, focusable to true and focusable in touch mode to false. The first attribute will ensure that the label and the cat's name are read together in accessibility mode without swiping. And the second will ensure that these elements aren't focusable to non-accessibility users later. Another option for a specific use case is to use the label for attribute. It doesn't need an extra parent layout, which is more optimized and efficient for layouts. And instead, we use the attribute label for the cat's text name view. Our next screen is this main screen where the existing favorite cats are displayed. There's also at the bottom right, there is a floating action button or fab, which allows the user to add new favorite cats. This is how we would normally implement this. We have a layout with all the favorite cat images in and a fab button at the bottom. But when TalkBack reads the screen, it's going to laboriously go and read through all the through all the existing cats descriptions and finally get to the fab. But what if we want to first allow the user to add a new favorite? What if we first want to read out the fab? Well, what we can do is we can use the attribute accessibility traversal before and set it to what it must come before the existing favorite cat layout, that constraint layout. This layout will read new favorite button, double tap to activate, and then when the user swipes right, we'll start reading the existing cat's favorites descriptions. But what if something changes on the screen? How do we notify TalkBack users that something changed? We can use the announce for accessibility function. And for example, in this code snippet, we have a floating action button, and when it's clicked, we will add a random new favorite button, favorite cat. Remember, this is the example cat, app after all. And it will basically say added new favorite. So also you can use toasts, but remember that this is for both accessibility and non-accessibility users. My last little tip for today is about changing the default double tap to activate announcement on controls. So say I wanted to say, instead of new favorite button, double tap to add new. So say that if instead of I wanted to say new favorite button, double tap to activate, I would want to say new favorite button, double tap to add new Sparkcat. So all this complicated piece of code actually does is to replace the default description with the add new Sparkcat description. Accessibility on Android is really quite complicated, but with these few tips, you're going to get most of the way. Something I didn't cover is making custom views accessible, but that's almost like a whole talk on its own. When it comes to testing accessibility, I would like to encourage you to try it yourself. You can navigate to accessibility services in settings on your device and enable TalkBack. You can swipe right to move to the next view or left to swipe to the previous view. And TalkBack will announce whatever's in that view. You can double tap to select a control and to interact with it. And it's really quite interesting to see how fast and how accurately you can navigate your favorite apps and see what the pitfalls are. For example, I tried UberEats with TalkBack, and here are some of my conclusions. It wasn't really easy to find my regular restaurants. I really had to swipe a lot. It was also quite easy to find a regular order and to add an item to a cart, but it wasn't really easily discoverable. You actually had to swipe back, which is not intuitive. You could also make a payment quite easily, but once again, it wasn't discoverable. You had to swipe back. One of the worst things that I found on UberEats was that the special carousels made it really unusable. It would the carousel is automatically scrolling carousel, and it would announce each special one by one, even though you don't have that control activated. So it would just talk over whatever you were busy with in the app. Some text was actually read literally. So in my country, the currency is Rand or R. So it would read R for expensive, or just one R for maybe cheap or inexpensive. And some pop-up dialogues were actually obstructing the view, but they weren't announced. So those would be, for example, when you had ordered something and they wanted you to rate a delivery, it would obstruct the view completely, but you didn't know that it was there. Accessibility Scanner is an app from Google that you can install on your device, and it will help you by scanning any screen, and it will give a suggestion to improve the accessibility of that screen. It will help with content labeling and touch target sizing, contrast ratios, and also clickable items. Some of the conclusions that I came to from using the accessibility scanner on UberEats was, you can see it's drawn around a few controls. It's drawn some boxes with red. The drop-down boxes were too small, and various buttons were also too small. And there was insufficient contrast on that green and white view cart button label. Something else that you can use is the Play pre-launch report. So that you can find on your Play console when you upload your app. And it will help you with doing automated testing, and will create screenshots, and that will be analyzed for accessibility issues that you can have a look at before you launch. And it will show you stuff like touch target sizes, content labeling, low contrast, and other implementation issues. So the real purpose of my talk today wasn't just to impart knowledge, but rather to get you to become an accessibility ally with me. I want you to become excited about the prospect of affecting real positive social change by making your Android app more accessible. If you'd like to see my sources or do further research, you're welcome to have a look at my blog, PamelaAhill.com, where I've listed all my sources and some handy hints that you can have a look at. This talk is also in the form of blog articles. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. You can find me at PamelaAhill.com or tweet at me, PamelaAhill. Thank you.